Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And we are meeting once again with lecture 13 of modern novel, that is novel 2. And today's lecture is going to be very interesting because we are going to bring in our discussion a few thinking teasers related to the story To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. And I'll try to give you in between the chunks of the movie as well, so you can relate the discussion with the scenes and can understand through kinesthetic language. You can enrich your understanding. Well, the questions we are going to discuss in our today's discussion are going to be basically the essence of the critic's concern. The very important question include the existence of main themes in the story and what do they convey about the society of 20th century. And how does Virginia Woolf, being a famous writer of her own time, 20th century, and known as mother of stream of consciousness, uses symbolism to advance her thematic goals. Well, if you chunk this question down into two pieces, you will get to know that the question can be chunked down into how many themes are there in the novel, or how many themes that we can take out of the novel that let us understand, or that let us understand the time, the era where this novel was written, when this novel was written, or how many themes reflect the situation of the time where the writer was living in. And then the use of symbolism, the symbolic, the allegoric use of devices by Virginia Woolf to advance her thematic goal of the narrative. So these are going to be two categories of the questions that we are going to answer. Why am I chopping down this question into two parts? So to make you understand that when such questions come in for your assessment, for example in your exam, you don't need to run on the question, pick up the parts you like or you know, answer them and leave the rest of the question. Attempting a question means pay attention on what has been asked for, what is the requirement. You can see it's a long question. So the very first step should be to read it with patience. Given one or two readings and see, okay, how many parts the question can be chopped down. Now, fairly we can see that this question can be chopped down into two main parts. Once you are able to divide the categories inside the question, then try to address those categories separately, because if I run on this question and I focus on the word symbolism, okay, this question is about symbolic devices used by Virginia Woolf, so I write all the symbolism techniques down there. Or if I read the question and read first 4 or 5 words and look at the words theme and I get stuck there and start writing my answer, a hasty answer, I'll try to note down all the themes in the story, and that is going to be my answer to this question from my side. No, this is not fair, this is not right. You know that this question is basically a comparatively a broader canvas that does not only include the themes, the symbols. However, it also includes how you are going to mold your answer in order to answer the question. Because straight away discussion of themes will not serve the purpose. A straight away discussion of symbols either will not serve the purpose. You will have to mold the discussion down in order to relate this to your question, because the question has been how both of these devices, the themes and symbols, have been used to convey about the society of the time. So how do they reflect the society is basically the question. Now, they means themes and symbol. How the strategies, the writing strategies of the writer help you understand the era where she belongs to. So, moving on with it, first we will discuss the thematic structure of the narrative. And there are few themes which are very obvious, although I always say this, that there is no limit to taking themes out. Even a paragraph can give me some interpretation that may help me create altogether a unique theme that has not been explored so far, though it is quite rare. However, it is possible. But there are few themes which are commonly observed and are very obvious in Virginia's writing. And one of those themes is the transience of life and work. The themes which would have helped Virginia Woolf to construct the plot of this narrative. Now at this point I would like to add that there are two types of themes. One are those which are basically part of the plan of the writer when he or she is writing the narrative. However, the second group of themes is of those which basically writer weave inside his or her plot. However, they may not be planned weaving of the themes. These are the interpretation of creative minds. So the point to be noted here is that the themes that I would want you to include in this question, and the questions such as this, should be the themes which are most obvious, which would have been the part of the writer's plan while writing. That means thematic structure of her story. So the transience of life and work is one of such themes, and in this theme we can discuss that Mr. Ramsay and Mrs. Ramsay take completely different approaches to life. Mr. Ramsay realizes on his intellect, while Mrs. Ramsay depends on her emotions. That is very obvious when you are reading the novel. However, there are many things which are not said in black and white, however, can fairly be observed while watching the visual. However, both of these people, this pair, they share the knowledge that the world around them is transient, that nothing lasts forever, and things are to be finished. You will find all the time Mr. Ramsay worrying for this very purpose, that one day he will finish and nobody will remember his name, so he must do something to make his name remembered by people. On the other hand, Mrs. Ramsay, although she possesses the same kind of notion, but she has a different intention behind, and that is that no one will remain forever. Tomorrow I will finish, so I should better use today to do something that people will think about me with love and respect. So, although the notion of transience is very obvious, however, this is attached with two entirely separate kind of intentions. Mr. Ramsay reflects that even the most enduring of reputations, such as Shakespeare's, are doomed to eventual oblivion, and that there's nothing that lasts forever, not even things that are considered so obvious when literature is explored, like Shakespeare's reputation. This very realization of an end of everything accounts for the bitter aspect of Mr. Ramsay's character. So, frustrated by the inevitable demise of his own body of work and envious of the few geniuses who will outlast him, he plots to found a school of philosophy that argues that the world is designed for the average, unadorned man, for the lift man in the tube rather than for the rare immortal writer. So it is like, it is something like that. When you can't do something, you blame circumstances, then blaming yourself. He got so frustrated by this. I would say it's it's a writer's block, or maybe it's an artist's block, that although he desperately wants to do something, but he can't. So in order to avoid, rather in order to fight an artist's block, what he does here is that his frustration guides him to coin a kind of philosophy that supports his situation. And his situation is that he can do nothing. So he says that this world is not good for immortal writer. Rather, people who are of average intellect can do good over here. So that was Mr. Ramsay. However, we understand that how this theme of transience of life and work penetrates in both of these characters to strengthen the thematic plots of Woolf's narrative. Now, Mrs. Ramsay is as keenly aware as her husband of the passage of time and of mortality. We know that Mrs. Ramsay is not a literate woman. However, her knowledge of mortality and immortality and her awareness of these concepts is clearer and brighter than Mr. Ramsay, who is a philosopher, a learned, knowledgeable, skilled philosopher. She recoils, for instance, at the notion of James growing into an adult, registers the world's many dangers, and knows that no one, not even her husband, can protect her from them. So, by this very notion, we understand that Mrs. Ramsay's character is not based on fallacies. She is a woman of realistic nature and realistic concepts, and she believes in realism. Although she is uneducated and a kind of entirely housewife, however, she does not blindly rely on her husband, because she knows not only on her husband, but neither on her son, because she knows that there is no one in the world who can protect her from tomorrow. Tomorrow has to come, and no one knows what lies in there in tomorrow. Her reaction to his knowledge is markedly different from her husband. So this very understanding of both of these characters make us realize that it's not education, it's not awareness, it's not brought up, it's the nature inside every human being that gets reflected in his or her actions and thoughts. Although education, learning and skills, they play a significant role in refining a person, however, refinement is a practice done on the thing that already exists. So if you're a good human being by nature, your goodness will get refined. If you're a bad human being by nature, your bad aspects of yourself will get even refined. However, this is not a rule of thumb. Things may change, people may change, because time is a phenomenon of absolute power, and time changes, and so the human beings. So this theme let us understand that how world reacts and how situations react and how people react accordingly. So we know these characters as parallel a phenomenon in the story, who are going side by side, but they are a clear contrast to each other. We find that Mr. Ramsay is bowed by the weight of his own demise. Mrs. Ramsay is fueled with the need to make precious and memorable whatever time she has on earth. So this very idea basically brings all what I have discussed so far regarding these characters into a nutshell, discussing that although they both think about things getting to an end, and they are very much conscious, aware of this phenomenon. However, how do they use this knowledge is the skill that is natural, that is innate. we know that Mr. Ramsay uses this awareness as a weight of his own demise. He carries this weight all the time, and this weight does not help him do anything at all, or anything worth noticing or worth appreciating. However, Mrs. Ramsay, though she knows the same thing, but this idea fuels her with the need of doing and using this time to its best, and doing all those precious and memorable things, whatever the time allows and are possible on this earth. So, such crafted movements, she reflects, offered the only hope of something that endures, and she believes that this goodness of what she gives to the world in whatever times available to her is basically something that will last. And here we may understand this her figure, her character as a religious figure in the story as well, because this is what Christianity preaches. This is what I would say every religion would preach, because eventually all religions are they all stem from the religion of love and peace. So, Mrs. Ramsay's character helps us understand the spirit of Christianity in the story as well. Now, with this discussion based on both of these characters, this makes me take you to watch and observe things for yourself and see how, since right from the beginning of the story, you will find a clear difference in both of these characters. So now you're going to watch the very beginning scenes of the movie, where you will be able to understand for yourself that how things are portrayed to basically provide this theme of transientness for life and work. And you will see that the movie starts from Cornwall, 1912, and where all the family members, they are sitting around a dining table. This sets the notion of how the domestic front created by or held by Mrs. Ramsay keeps everyone together and is quite bonding. And you will find that James, being the youngest boy in the family, is being punished for insisting on his will going to Lighthouse. And this idea of punishment comes from his father, not mother. So this negativity starts right from the beginning. The protagonist is shown talking to herself, being highly imaginative. On the other hand, that feeling of that desire of creativity is shown through the imaginative self of Mrs. Ramsay. And she is taking notes in her diary, knowingly that she is an uneducated lady who is just a housewife, then seeing her doing such a disciplined getting into such a disciplined practice, that taking notes of her thoughts make us like her even more. And then you will see the relationship between Mr. Charles and Mr. Ramsay is established. Now, I referred to that idea of Mrs. Ramsay's hatred, dislike for the people who are able to establish their reputation in the world, and Mr. Charles is one of them, being Mr. Ramsay's apparently student in the story, and a supervisee who is staying with Mr. Ramsay to take his guidance in order to complete his thesis. However, we find, although this relationship is full of respect and expectation in the beginning, where Charles expects a lot from Mr. Ramsay's scholarly self. However, how later on it changes its shape is quite observable. Then we find that Mr. Ramsay's attitude towards his family is made explicitly understandable by James' loss of wicket during cricket match, and things get even clearer when we see how the family is indulged in playing a game by the beach, and how everyone is supporting James to be the smallest kid of the family and the youngest boy in the family, and then all of a sudden, when he loses a wicket, how he is dealt by Mr. Ramsay makes us understand Ramsay's position in his family as a father. So let's have this watch and you'll be able to understand things yourself in detail now.
The sea must be the hardest subject of all. It teems with its own life, yet threatens us with oblivion. James is like a kite. There's Mrs. Ramsay, holding the other end of the string.
Days are slipping by.
Yes, sir. I did hope we might have an opportunity to discuss my dissertation soon.
Time we did, Charles. Time we did.
Yes, I would value that, sir.
Bravo! Is this the last man of whom cricket legends are made?
I doubt it.
How's that? I wasn't ready. Oh, yes, you were.
Jasper, you did bowl rather hard.
I wasn't ready!
Come on, James. Out is out.
Oh, give him another go.
Yes, I'm all for that.
James, you are out. I don't want this little fish. I don't want this little fish in my net. It's a naughty, nasty little fish, and I won't have him for dinner. He's going back into the sea.
Hello, Cam.
Hello, Aunt Lily.
How was your sketching, Miss Briscoe?
I wasn't very pleased with my efforts today, I'm afraid, Mr. Tansley. You're such a harsh judge of your own talents, Lily, dearest.
There's never been a major woman artist.
Really?
I wish we're not so.
We're not dealing with the matter of it is so or it is not so. We're discussing mere opinions, aren't we?
I think there is such a thing as objective truth, an undeniable manifested consensus of thought. Mr. Ramsay, I'm sure, would agree with me.
I expect you have a fondness for lists. Best poet, second best poet, third best poet.
Oh, hardly so facile.
Doubtless you have jolly arguments as to who is the best undergraduate of his year.
In my year, it was me.
Have you seen the shipwreck yet, Mr. Tansley?
Oh, no, Andrew, I haven't.
Tony will cover it soon, of course. There's not much to see now. But even so, she went down in that storm. You know, the one that sent the snake to like round the
Masterly, mother dearest.
Let's hope it's fine tomorrow.
Why is that, Father?
The tournament, Andrew, the tournament.
Come along, James. Not too slow.
Caroline, I've had enough of your damn philanthropy. We do less and less together. If you aren't writing letters to bereaved relatives, then you're fiddling about with your account book. You will accompany me and the children to the tournament,
Michael,
Caroline.
I cannot.
You will not make any of your damn visits today.
Waterland Livy is dying. I have to visit him.
Oh, Caroline.
Can we go shopping, Mother?
No. I thought you wanted to go to the beach today.
Was Father angry?
Marie, here's one found.
I can't find James. I've looked everywhere.
Well, look again. The house isn't that big.
Beg pardon, sir. I thought as everyone had finished.
A little vice I have. Do hurry up, you confounded children. I should be there by now.
I'm sure you'll enjoy it. It's such a beautiful day.
Oh, don't be such a misery, Nancy, please.
Wouldn't you rather change places with me, Mr. Tansley? Wrestling isn't really my cup of tea at all. But I love going with Mother on her rounds. People, they're so real.
Oh, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Tansley. Goodbye, my dears. Enjoy yourselves. We're going to the village, Mr. Carmichael. You want anything? Stamps, writing paper, tobacco. You should have been a great philosopher. You made an unfortunate marriage. Have you come this way before?
Is it quicker?
It's prettier. Your predecessor liked it.
Or what?
Your predecessor. My husband invites one of his students down here most years. Why, Mr. Tansley, you look quite hurt.
No, it's just that well, I forget what a pattern everything has.
We've been coming down here for several years, you know.
Well, who lived in that house before?
A mining family. They went bankrupt, I believe. It was sad. The house stood empty for years because nobody wanted it.
Must be pleasant to have two houses.
You disapprove?
Well, many people in Cornwall don't even have one.
You are our guest, Mr. Tansley. Why, Mr. Tansley, you are tinder dry. I do believe if you stand out here in this sun for more than an hour, you'll go up in smoke. Like that.
Mrs. Ramsey, let me carry your basket.
That is kind of you.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, good morning. Have you met my daughters?
No, I haven't.
Prudence and Nancy and this? These couple of rascals are my sons. Mr. Trevorrow, how's that young son of yours going to fare? Is he going to win the belt and bring you glory?
He's got Hawkins to deal with.
Ah, yes, Hawkins.
Get in there!
They risk their lives every day to earn their keep. What do they do with sport? They break each other's bodies and wrestle in matches. Oh, I don't think it's quite as dangerous as that, Nancy. Last year, one man broke his back. He's in a wheelchair now. Isn't that the most appalling, ridiculous tragedy. Well, it's just the way they are.
Is Sam on again yet?
Next bout. Semi-final, isn't it?
I've got a bet on the final. Don't tell Father.
Backing our Sam, are you?
I've got a bet with Mildred.
Paul's coming soon, isn't he, Prue?
Yes.
We shall see less of you.
To endure that train journey is ample proof of devotion.
The boy should be at the tournament.
I need him here, Walter. Now, don't you be arguing with that. Tom, Mrs. Ramsay has a word to say.
Tom, you know where I live, don't you? I've told your mother that if she needs me urgently, at any time, she's to send you to fetch me. You must use the back door if it's in the night. It's never locked.
Come on, Sam.
You predicted well, Mr. Trevorrow.
You've got him, Sam!
Bad luck, Sam. Come now, Trevorrow. Lose like a gentleman.
It's fixed. There's a pair back to Tam out there, no doubt about it.
And you will also find that this exchange of opinions between Mr. Charles and Lily is basically the opening of the theme of feminism here. You must have observed this in this watch, that when both of these characters they get together, there's a kind of negative spark that takes place between them, and it's because of the representation of the theme of feminism that Woolf has embedded in the character of Lily. And then this gender biased perception that that colors this concept brighter for the viewers to understand. We find that in the watch you must have found that Mr. Tansley takes a stroll with Mrs. Ramsay, and they talk about, and then they go into the masculine sport, wrestling, to watch it, and it shows Mr. Ramsay's character, the kind of things that he likes and enjoy, and the kinds of things that Mrs. Ramsay does despite the fact that she does not like it. And feminism and yet philanthropic nature of Mrs. Ramsay, how she's keeping up and maintaining her true nature, and how is she keeping up with the expected self of Mrs. Ramsay by Mr. Ramsay is brilliantly presented in this clip. So, moving on with our discussion, and the second theme of the story that can be mentioned here that strengthens the thematic structure of the narrative is art as a means of preservation. Although this theme has a thread of it in the talk that we had in the previous section based on the transientness of life, where I discussed that this is basically Mrs. Ramsay's concept that the only preservation is possible through the good deeds that you do. the remarkable and cherishable memories that you leave in this world, because that's the only inheritance that you can leave behind. However, it is explained that an existence that is inherently without order or meaning, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay employ different strategies for making their lives significant. So this is one of those strategies that Mrs. Ramsay uses in order to make her life significant and memorable. Mr. Ramsay devotes himself to his progression through the course of human thought, while Mrs. Ramsay cultivates memorable experiences from social interactions. So now we bring in Mrs. Ramsay's bubbly nature of getting into social interactions. Why would she do that? So now you will understand that you must have observed her presence in the scene in the movie clip that we watched just now, that she is a woman of a nature who would like to bring people closer, would like to invent things to bring them closer. Why would she go for the social interaction? Because she believes this to be an experience that is memorable. She believes this to be a way of cultivating love and closeness that she thinks will create memories that may last more than a human being. And this is totally contrary to what Mr. Ramsay believes in. So neither of these strategies, however, proves an adequate means of preserving one experience. After all, Mr. Ramsay fails to obtain the philosophical understanding he so desperately desires, and Mrs. Ramsay's life, though filled with moments and that have the shine and resilience of rubies, ends, and she is forgotten. Only Lily Briscoe finds a way to preserve her experience, and that way is through her art. So we find that although both of these characters, I am referring to Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay characters, they show different ways of preserving oneself. However, they both do not really succeed in doing so. However, Lily's character, Lily Briscoe, who is an artist and she paints, is one character that through her art she is able to preserve her experience that is observed by people even after her, or even when she is not there physically. So the theme basically throws light on the concept of art being a carrier, a medium of preservation. So basically these themes come out of 20th century, and we know that 20th century is a time of brilliant artists and brilliant painters, and we have some big names and big shots from the time, like of Picasso and some other big names. And why the art flourished during this time? Because this was the idea behind that art is one of those means that enable human being to preserve memories and preserve experiences. So this was the second strongest theme in the novel that helped Woolf create a strong thematic structure of the story. Now, as Lily begins her portrait of Mrs. Ramsay at the beginning of the novel, Woolf notes the scope of the project. Lily means to order and connect elements that have no necessary relation in the world. Hedges and houses, and mothers and children. By the end of the novel, 10 years later, Lily finishes the painting she started, which stand as a moment of clarity wrested from confusion. Well, art is perhaps the only hope of surety in a world destined and determined to change. For while mourning Mrs. Ramsay's death and painting on the lawn, Lily reflects that nothing stays, all changes, but not words, not pain. And that is a third philosophy that gets in as a counter argument. All right, I want you to now watch that how Mrs. Tansley's attitude is thrown out through his speech, and how Mr. Tansley's interest in Charles' work to give you different varieties of concept, and then teacher-student talk, and the change of relationship, or the picture of that relationship that gets clearer and clearer in reader's eye, and how Mr. Ramsay's monologue adds into your understanding. You will also see that Mrs. Tansley's regret of her formal education, though you could have been able to watch this into a previous clip, that this difference of education does not create a big gulf between both of these characters. As a matter of fact, what creates this gulf is something else. Now, Nancy's plea for their privacy during vacations. Nancy is the daughter of the family, Ramsay's family, and then how Mr. Ramsay talked to Mrs. Ramsay. This helps us determine the relationship between the husband and wife. And how Mrs. Ramsay knitting for lighthouse keeper's son. Mrs. Ramsay's idea of leaving good notes behind her makes her do things out of her scope. So let us have this quick watch and establish our understanding based on it.
Have you got your speech ready, Father?
Well, Andrew, what do you think? Did Sam have a fare back or no?
I really don't know, Father. Don't know the rules.
Well, you should. This is an important sport to the people here. The least we can do is try to understand it.
Well, Trevorrow watches Jasper and I playing chess in the garden for hours on end. Hasn't taken any interest in that.
Do you think that's comparable?
I was only giving my point of view, Father.
Then you're a fool.
I suppose he knows the rules.
Of course he does, Andrew. He'll have sat down with the local experts the first summer he came here and found out all about it.
I wish only to say that I am honored that you have asked me to present the prizes today. We Ramsays are only swallows, you know, here for the summers. Indeed, I feel it is presumptuous that someone like I should stand here in the place of honor, when there are doubtless others whose roots are deep down in this countryside that I love so much. Others far more fitting than I. Thank you. Fred Hawkins.
He's won again.
I'm sure you find this pace most irritating. Do like to be getting on in a hurry, don't you, Mr. Tansley?
My mother says I can't keep still for 5 minutes.
Have you been homesick since you've been here?
Of course not.
You haven't always been happy, though.
One does feel sometimes on the outside.
I expect you haven't had all the time you'd like with Michael. I hope you've been writing regularly to your mother and father.
When I can.
Forgive me. I shouldn't pry into other people's lives. It's a vice I have.
Is what you've been doing this afternoon a vice? Or a virtue? Little boy Tom was rather hostile.
Such fierce pride.
I'm the eldest son in my family.
So you are.
I can't afford to visit much during term. My younger sister May's rather bright, you know. I earn the money to pay for her schooling. I earn the money to pay for my own schooling and all my studies at the university.
Come in.
I brought my dissertation. You said I showed it at dinner.
Yeah, good. Put it on the desk, then.
You'll be able to read it through this evening, will you?
Don't worry, Charles. Off you go.
I don't want to be a trouble to you, sir.
Of course you're no trouble. I'm a teacher, am I not? I must help my students, mustn't I? How like you I was when I was 25. But I was further on than you are, Charles, my boy. You have reached H. I was as far as O.
That was lovely. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I do feel the lack of any real education on these occasions. Arithmetic, for instance.
Did you enjoy your walk with the atheist?
I wish you wouldn't call him that, Nancy.
The Church of England has a vested interest in the perpetuation of a property-owning ruling class. No god worth his salt would stomach a bishop.
Nancy, you really must show more respect. Your father has a very high opinion of young Mr. Tansley. Very able. He does say he's very able.
He could be a second Aristotle for all I care. He's a bore and a prig. And I wish he wasn't here. Next year, don't you think we can come down here and just be on our own? Couldn't we do that? Just family. No boring old students or crusty old family friends. No injured birds. Oh, Mother, please.
I don't know who you mean by injured birds, Nancy.
Yes, you do.
That's enough.
If you wouldn't mind, Nancy, I wish to talk with your mother. You'll strain your eyes, Caroline.
Yes, I must stop soon.
Who are you knitting for now?
Ben Sawley's son. The lighthouse keeper's son.
I've been trying to work.
It's Marie's evening off. That's why the children are so noisy.
Whether they're noisy or not is beside the point. I am unable to work. My brain has become an unwilling beast.
It's been a tiring day for you, Michael. Leave it till morning. I'm sorry our Sam didn't win.
Your absence was a subject of comment.
The light has gone. I cannot be bothered to have the candles.
Well, now, the small clip that you are going to watch now is extremely important to understand the philosophy forwarded by Virginia Woolf, and this philosophy is carried through the conversation between Nancy and Lily while they are exploring the philosophy of world and nature of individuals. A very important talk and conversation in the novel where Lily is envious to see Nancy being much loved. This helps us understand Nancy's as well as Lily's character. On the other hand, Nancy is not happy with her inspected life, and she feels herself as caged, as a bird who is caged in a golden cage. On the other hand, we see that James' request to his mother for going to the lighthouse is such a consistent request. However, it always meets a consistent refusal. Let's watch.
They go rather well together, don't you think, Mr. Carmichael?
Always arguing, aren't they?
They're both so serious. Mr. Tansey should be a politician. He would change the world for the better. And Lily would be a source of strength to him. She would have her studio, and he is studying. You're not listening, Mr. Carmichael.
Do you like Charles Tansley?
Well, we have certain problems in common. Do you?
It's not my type.
What is your type?
I don't know, really.
Come on.
People say I'm too serious. The world isn't a funny place, is it?
It's strange. Your mother believes the world is filled with tragedy, but she laughs all day long.
Mr. Carmichael says she's extraordinarily beautiful. Lily, I don't know what that means.
I do. If you could wave a wand, I suspect you'd choose to be someone other than Nancy Ramsey.
I'd like to be Marie. She's a long way from home amongst foreigners. I'd love to be amongst foreigners. And she has secrets.
Don't you?
No. Ramses aren't allowed to have secrets. They are endlessly inspected.
You are much loved. I envy you that.
Marie had a letter from Switzerland. She read it up in her room. She cried for hours, didn't she, Ken?
Oh, Andrew, quick!
You'll go soon, won't you, Mother?
Write too many letters, Mother.
Mother, but we will go soon.
Where, my dearest?
To the lighthouse.
Oh, dear boy. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Prue wanted to come with me, but I thought it best she stay at home. The evenings are growing chilly this late in the summer. It's lovely here. You'll like it. When I come down in mid-July, you know, and there's been the summer term and a year in stuffy London, let me tell you, my mind is in a parlous state. They do say, don't they, that you can improve an old clock by putting a piece of cloth in the back with a trace of oil on it. This is my piece of oily cloth.
All right, so I hope after this observation of the conversation between of this philosophy between both the ladies, you are ready to explore the third theme, third strong thematic pillar of the narrative, and that is the subjective nature of reality. You must have noticed the tinge of reality that Mrs. Ramsay's conversation adds into the story. You will see that towards the end of the novel, Lily reflects that in order to see Mrs. Ramsay clearly, to understand her character completely, she would need at least 50 pairs of eyes. Only then would she be privy to every possible angle and nuance that the character keeps. That's one wonderful statement in order to understand Mrs. Ramsay's character the way it is portrayed by Woolf in the story. The truth, according to this assertion, rests in the accumulation of different, even opposing vantage points. Woolf's technique in structuring the story mirrors Lily's assertion. She is committed to creating a sense of the world that not only depends upon the private perceptions of her characters, but is also nothing more than the accumulation of those perceptions. To try to reimagine the story as told from a single character's perspective, or in the tradition of the Victorian novelist, from the author's perspective, is to realize the radical scope and difficulty of Woolf's project. So, the another important pillar of this thematic structure is the restorative effect of beauty. Now, when we have discussed about art, we have discussed about life and work and its transience, we cannot leave beauty behind, being the readers of 20th century literature and then the readers of Virginia Woolf's literature. At the beginning of the novel, both Mr. Ramsay and Lily Briscoe are drawn out of moments of irritation by an image of extreme beauty. The image in both cases is a vision of Mrs. Ramsay, who she sits reading with James, is a sight powerful enough to incite rapture in William Banks. You must have watched this when you were doing, in the beginning of the lecture, you watched some beginning clips regarding the movie, and this was one thing to capture and to understand the image of extreme beauty that is shown in the movie. So beauty retains this soothing effect throughout the novel. I don't know if you would have been able to observe this by going through the text or the reader, but you definitely would have observed this while watching these clips, that something as trifling as a large but very beautiful arrangement of fruit can for a moment assuage the discomfort of the guests at Mrs. Ramsay's dinner party. Well, Lily later complicates the notion of beauty as restorative by suggesting that beauty has the unfortunate consequence of simplifying the truth. That is very important to understand, that too much of making up of things basically hides the truth underneath, and that normally is very simple and quite easy in layering. Her impression of Mrs. Ramsay, she believes, is compromised by a determination to view her as beautiful and to smooth over her complexities and faults. Nevertheless, Lily continues on her quest to still or freeze a moment from life and make it beautiful, although the vision of an isolated moment is necessarily incomplete. It is lasting and as such endlessly seductive to her. Well, this makes me to take you into another short clip of a few minutes, hardly 4 minutes to hardly 10 to 12 minutes, to make you observe how Mr. Ramsay considers living with family is achieved nothing, just a consolation prize. This, when you are describing Mr. Ramsay's character and trying to zoom in his personality to show his relationships with different relations in the society, with his family, with his scholarly commitments, with his students, with the social life, this understanding will help you a lot. So I would again here mention to take notes while you are observing these clips, because you may find something very clear and very comprehensible that you could not catch, or you might have overlooked while reading it in the novel. You will see that Paul has come to propose Miss Ramsay. Now you will find here Mrs. Ramsay's role of knitting things together, of building up links between people, and above all, making people being bonded. The guest is found dead in bed. Mrs. Ramsay shares her fears of dying before Mr. Ramsay with Lily. Now, in the previous section, we saw Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay's relation through Mr. Ramsay. Now, in this watch, you will observe this relation through Mrs. Ramsay. So this will definitely be a wonderful addition to your knowledge. You will also find a discussion of loneliness as a feeling. And you will also find a discussion based on relationship between men and women, between both of these ladies. You have become half a person. That's what Lily Briscoe says. Let's enjoy this watch. However, before you enjoy this watch, do not forget to take notes of both of the discussions, which are very important for your knowledge. Let's watch it.
I'm sure you could have persuaded him, dear Brisk.
Well, why should I, Mrs. Ramsay? He didn't come here to go for invigorating walks. He came to...
Oh, the dissertation. Well, it matters to him. I'm glad you two seem to be getting on better than you used to.
We're going to that standing stone up there.
I'm having a rest. Base camp. Come on, children. Base camp. There. Michael has his expedition.
Oh, no. Hello, Mr. Rayleigh?
Am I disturbing you?
Oh, you know, Mr. Rayleigh, we artists are a solitary lot.
It's quite marvellous up here, Miss Briscoe. I think if I had any ability whatever with a brush, this is where I'd come.
I have no ability.
Of course you have.
But I do persist. I'm very stubborn.
Well, perhaps you couldn't not paint, even if you wanted to abandon it.
Do you know much about painting, Mr. Rayleigh?
I go to exhibitions when I can. I'm sure you'd find my taste very old hat. I bought a painting last year, as a matter of fact. It's pretty straightforward. a view of Richmond. I first met Miss Ramsay in Richmond. We went for a walk in the park. We watched the deer.
The painting's an aid memoir, is it?
Good day, Miss Whisker.
How can I...
I do not agree that it has to be done.
But you must keep the house in some state of repair.
I'm sorry, but I cannot afford it. This house is a luxury, Caroline. We are here for 8 weeks in the year. But for the remainder, it is a drain on my purse. Now, I love these summers more than anyone, but let me say this. If you continue to give the nod to such unnecessary expenditure, I shall sell. I will place the house on the market this very autumn.
What do you want me to do? Shall I instruct Trevora to take all the materials back?
I have no wish to discuss this trivial matter any further. Do as you think fit.
Has he found out?
Oh, he says he cannot afford it. It's ridiculous. Of course he can afford it. Not easily, but it won't reduce us to the workhouse.
Father worries so about money.
Oh, it's a moral issue, Prue. This house is a luxury. Luxuries are immoral. Therefore, nothing must be spent on it. Oh, look at it. It's such a pity.
You know, Charles, as I get older, I find I return more and more to the central conundrum of philosophy. Or rather, it returns to me. The relationship between mind and body. Here I am, after 40 years of reflection. I feel that somehow we are all fundamentally wrong. I cannot find a concept that fits the physical facts. Minds are brains, after all. Brains are flesh and blood. Mind is meat, Charles.
We do not perceive our minds as meat, sir.
Ah, but maybe we should, dear boy. That is my point. I go to the beach for a bathe. The sea sets my skin tingling, but the sea also sets my brain tingling. Do you get my point? The sea may affect how I think. How is this, Charles? Assist me.
I'm not sure I follow you, Mr. Ramsay.
Cheer up, Charles, cheer up. Charles! Charles! Good gracious boy, what's the matter?
I do not enjoy being the subject of amusement.
Oh, really?
But I admire your ability, Mr. Ramsay, enormously. You know that. I felt it was such a privilege to be asked down here to work with you. I left my family and I came down. I thought to spend so many weeks to be able to discuss my dissertation, I thought I must not miss such a chance. Now it is nearly over.
What are you trying to say?
I feel disappointed. Deeply disappointed.
Do you?
I don't understand you. All this gardening and sitting about and playing cricket and playing on the beach, none of it matters, does it? Well, what about your work? Isn't that what matters? Or is it your family that matters? Is all your reading and writing and all our discussions and debates, is that all a game? Well, my work isn't a hobby to me. It's real. It's absolute. And my political views, they're real too. I can't play games. Do I have to be a good sport to be acceptable to you?
Mr. Tansley. Mr. Tansley! I have something more to say to you, Mr. Tansley.
Miller, Mr. Ramsey wants to know where I am. Tell him I've gone to the village.
I'm hot, Mother.
Well, stay in the shade then. I must just finish this bed.
Half a league onward. All through the valley of death rode the 600.
Father?
Yes, Cam. What is it?
Mr. Tansley, he gave me a message for you.
What was the message?
Will you mend my shrimping net?
Come on.
Where is the focus of such a house? I'm not sure I can see it. The outside tells me nothing. It should be sliced through, like a beehive against glass. Passages revealed, storage areas, the royal nursery. James VI is stormy. Poor James. There will be no trip to the lighthouse today. Today is for the dissertation.
James! Has anyone seen James?
There is my focus. I found my subject.
There. Cam, what was the message?
He's always asleep.
That's because he... Well, he's up for much of the night writing his poetry. He's quite a well-respected poet, you know. But his work is rather out of vogue now. He was a teacher in India. He and Father were undergraduates together. He comes down every year. One of the traditions.
Well done, Jasper. I'm going to see Mother.
Come in.
Shall I come back later?
No, of course not, Prudy.
Children, off you go.
find this gloom horribly depressing. How is my household, Prue? Is it still running along without me?
It's like Sleeping Beauty. The house is so silent. James and Cam haven't had a fight for 3 days.
Extraordinary. How is Paul?
Rather sunburned at present.
Don't be evasive.
Last night I suddenly woke up, started wondering, what will he be like when he's 60?
Just as he is now. We grow old together, husbands and wives.
And I kept on thinking, how has this happened? And why this particular man? I mean, we met and we're in love, but it's all so random. Is that an awful thing to say?
I first met Michael at a reception. Hundreds of people, you know, standing around talking. And I saw him standing there, all alone, with a plate in one hand and a glass in the other. It was as if he were a thin, black post sticking out of the water. And all those other people were just bobbing around him like so much flotsam. Such a vivid recollection.
But were you sure?
Very. Yes? Oh, Jasper.
Are you feeling better now, Mother?
Yes, Jasper. Much better.
God, that's what. Race to the beat.
I'll beat you.
Okay, now this very clip is going to be very significant for its development, depth of the development of relations. You will find that conclusive understanding of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey's character. If you go back and recall where I told you that the comparison of both of these characters will let you understand the story in detail, basically relates to this very aspect. You will find Mr. Ramsey calling Carolina, "I'm sick of your philanthropy." Now, this is not only what we see into Mrs. Ramsey's character, this is seen by her own husband, who is not that philanthrop as she is. The philosophy of relationship between mind and body, and then supervisor and supervisee during a game of badminton is quite obvious to basically see the eventual developments of the relationship of Mr. Ramsey with society, education and intellect. And this binds us, this links us together with the very first theme that we discussed. How does he see the scope of life? Mr. Michael, his professional ethic and responsibilities will then draw, his presence draws a clear contrast to what is social expectation, and how do we find Mr. Ramsey as a unique digression. Then Lily's monologue will definitely add bits of knowledge into whatever has happened so far. And Carolina is sick inside bedroom, away from her household. It's a sleeping beauty. Now again, moving back to our first theme that we discussed, the transience, and we could discuss that both the ideas by Mr. Ramsay and Mrs. Ramsay could not last long, and they both did not succeed in their idea of creating cherishable or memorable past, is basically reinforced by this discussion and these visuals. And then you will find a girl's doubts and inner self is revealed through the talk between Carolina and Prue. Why this particular man? That what will happen when he turns 60? So it's not a fear in Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay inside both of these characters. The fear of the time being transient is something that you will find in all the characters, although in different shapes. Well, let's have this watch. Okay, I hope by now your thematic structure is all clear about this narrative by Virginia Woolf, that is to the lighthouse, and that makes me take you to this symbolic journey that let you understand how the thematic goals are advanced by the writer. So, Woolf's use of symbolism is highly praised in 20th century literature. James gives us a clue as to how to interpret symbols into the lighthouse. As he finally draws the Ramsay's boat up to the lighthouse, he considers two competing and seemingly contradictory meanings of the lighthouse. The first depends upon the lighthouse as it appeared to him as a child, that it was a silvery, mist-colored tower and seemed to suggest the vague, romantic quality of the past. The second meaning stands in opposition, for as James nears the lighthouse and sees its barred windows and laundry drying on the rocks, there is nothing romantic about it. He resolves, however, to honor the truth of both images, deciding that nothing is simply one thing. Like James' interpretation of the lighthouse, the dominant symbols in the novel demand upon readings. Mr. Ramsay wrapping her shawl around the boar's head can be read merely as protection of her impressionable children from the unsightly suggestion of death, but it can also be read as a selfish attempt to keep from them a profound and inescapable truth. Choosing one option or the other diminishes the complexity of the novel's symbols and characters. Woolf resists formulaic symbols whereby one entity straightforwardly stands for another. She thus places us in the same position as her characters. The world of the novel is not filled with solidly or surely determined truths. Rather, truth, as Lily points out, must be collected from an endless number of impressions. She wishes that she had more than 50 pairs of eyes with which to view Mrs. Ramsay's character and understand her. We must approach the symbolism of To the Lighthouse with the same patience for multiple meanings. And this was all about today's lecture. In today's talk, we discussed the thinking teasers and the questions that are important to elaborate on the narrative by Virginia Woolf To the Lighthouse, and we tried to elaborate them in the light of the visual analysis that we could have by watching those clips from the movie. This was all for today's lecture. I'll see you in the next lecture now. Allah Hafiz.